Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar session, Customizing CK-12 Adaptive Practice and Assignments. I'm Lindsay, one of the CK-12 team members, and my colleague Katie and I will be running today's webinar. A reminder that this webinar is a core session for the CK-12 Certified Educator Program. So there is an assignment for this session, which can be found in the CEP Flexbook. Please be sure to preview the questions and make sure you are set to answer them, as you will need to work your way through the assignment in one sitting once you click Start Quiz. Once you click Start Quiz. Like our other sessions, we encourage you to use the chat window in Zoom to connect with others. You guys are doing a great job of that already. Just make sure that you've selected all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see what you've posted. The Q&A window is for questions that you have for the CK-12 team. This will help us track answers and make sure we get all of your questions answered accordingly. We have a resource page for each webinar session. You can find them in our CEP book, or you can use the tiny URL listed on the screen if you would like. It's tinyurl.com/CK12 custom AP 2019. You're welcome to print these resource pages or simply save it to your desktop. We hope you can use it after as a reference for when you're working on your assignments or editing Flexbooks throughout the year.
Thanks, Lindsay, and thanks to everyone who joined us for today for our session on customizing practice. In our Getting Started with CK-12 Adaptive Practice and Assignments section, we covered the basics of our adaptive practice system, along with CK-12 classes and reports. If you missed that session, I highly encourage you to revisit that archived recording on our webinars page. It has some key important pieces, and if you haven't seen it, this session is kind of the next advanced session, so it may be a little bit more confusing for you at this point in time. So just kind of keep that in mind. We'll try to prioritize pieces that are more those advanced topics today, and just kind of take care of the basic ones within the Q&A. So in this webinar, we're going to start by covering customizing CK-12's adaptive practice into quizzes. We'll talk about the difference between those two and how to start customizing or creating your own quiz. We'll then talk about writing your own questions. So we'll cover the types of questions you can create, how to do so, and how to incorporate formatted math text. And then finally, we'll talk about using those quizzes. So using them as inline questions, quizzes in Flexbooks 2.0, assigning them, and seeing reports and insights. So our main goal is that by the end of this session, you understand the difference between practice and CK-12 quizzes, and you can create your own custom quizzes or even your own questions and know how to use them, plus knowing what reports would look like for practice and quizzes on CK-12.
Before we get into the core content of the webinar, we're going to launch a poll to find out a little bit more about your knowledge of our practice tool and options for customizing practice. So you should see on your screen a poll that asks this question: what experience do you have with CK-12's adaptive practice and quizzes? Your options are: I am new to CK-12's adaptive practice, I use CK-12's adaptive practice, I have customized CK-12's adaptive practice into quizzes, I have embedded quizzes or inline questions in CK-12's Flexbooks, or swapped out practice for a quiz in a Flexbook 2.0. So we're going to give you just a minute to answer that, and then once you answer, we'll have a better idea maybe of how in depth we should go into covering each of these areas. About 80% of you have reported. We'll give you another 5 seconds or so. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and stop the poll and share the results. Okay, well, Katie, I'm not terribly surprised, but most folks on here are new to adaptive practice. Like she said, hopefully you've at least been introduced to it and are getting started with adaptive practice webinar, because that's kind of sets you up for the foundation of what's what Katie's going to take to the next level by using customizing. But we do have some people who've used us, a few who've customized, and then even a couple who've tried out the inline quizzes or swapping practice for quiz in a Flexbook. So let's go ahead and move on to the difference between CK-12's adaptive practice and customized quizzes, because they're a little bit different. Let's talk about the similarities between the two first. So both our adaptive practice system and our quizzes pull from CK-12's database of 150,000 questions. These are primarily in the areas of math, science, and spelling. These can be quick assigned from their modality pages or assigned through CK-12's classes or a learning management system. Reports include time spent, level of questions, answers chosen, etc. Students can access both practice and assigned quizzes through a browser on a phone, tablet, or a laptop. There are hints available, but for quizzes, you have the ability to turn them off. Scratchpad is available, and you can choose a due date if assigning. So that's what they both have in common.
Now let's talk just about adaptive practice. So adaptive practice adjusts to meet students at their current level of understanding. It gives them easier or harder questions based on the available questions there and how they're doing. If they're struggling, it will offer recommendations such as a text lesson, what we call a read, videos, interactive Plix, simulation, or more. And then the goal is to get 10 correct. So students get 100% if they meet this goal. They get full credit for whatever point value you set for the assignment in a learning management system if they meet that goal of 10 correct. But that's what they're working towards. It's really a learning tool. And as Lindsay said, hopefully most of you guys join us for the adaptive practice session and get a more in-depth look at what that looks like. If not, I definitely recommend going back and watching that. When you start practice, because it's really that kind of learning process, students can come in and out of practice. It will save their progress. They'll just return wherever they saved as they go. And our hints are always available. At the top there, you can see the Customize button. And that is what starts the process to create a quiz if you're trying to customize your own practice. So now into quizzes. So first thing you should know is that quizzes are not adaptive. So every student gets the same set of questions. If you start customizing your choice in number of questions, your choice in actual questions, you can kind of go in and pick and choose those specific ones. You could write your own questions. Our system is not going to override that and tell you, no, your student should have this instead. So therefore, just keep that in mind that we have our adaptive practice. And if you want to do something different, we will let you do that through our quiz feature right now. The report there is based on a % of the total that are correct. So if you have 10 questions, then the goal would be to get 10 correct. If you had 20 questions, the goal would be to get 20 correct. And if they only got 10, they would have a 50% instead of 100%. From there, each question starts in the beginning. So right now, because this often gets used as quizzes or tests for teachers, students do have, like every time they go in and access it, it's a new attempt. So you do need to kind of remember that it's not saving their progress and they can't come in and out of it the same way they can when they're learning through our practice. And you can set certain features like hints can be turned off, time can be set, number of attempts can be set. One thing to note, if you created a quiz and you embedded it in our new inline question type, which we'll talk about later, that does allow multiple attempts. So that's not kind of this, it works a little bit differently than if you assign the quiz separately. So we will talk about that more later in this webinar. But basically the difference between practice and quiz is that piece there. So now the question is, like what happens? How do you start? What are you doing if you're looking to customize practice to create your own quiz? So if you want to create a brand new quiz, you can start from your library. So in your library on CK-12, under that Create New button, you choose Quiz, and that will bring up a brand new quiz with no content in it, and you can start from scratch there. You can then add existing CK-12 concepts and questions or create your own within that quiz. If you want to create a quiz by customizing practice, you'll want to access that practice from the practice browse page, which will give you this version, or by going to a modality page through search or some of our browse options. And that will give you the option to kind of customize from within that modality page. So I think with that, and you can see that right there, I'm going to steal the screen over and we are going to access this on CK-12 and start exploring. So as I said, let's talk about kind of two ways to find adaptive practice to customize. So the first option is to go into the adaptive practice, and you can do that through this explore thing for adaptive practice right here, or the explore at the top menu, which is kind of across our site, and click on adaptive practice. And both this practice button under explore or the adaptive practice right here will get you to the same page. It will kick you into the browse page for adaptive practice. So let's say I chose to explore science concepts. So let's say earth science, and then maybe the scientific method. So it looks like I've opened this. I haven't really started it, so I have 0% on there. But if I go into that particular piece, I can click this customize button directly within here, and it will kick me into our quiz option. So that's option number one, is through the practice browse, I get the full option to take that practice and customize it. I can actually, in this case, keep practicing, although I hadn't really started, but I could practice and preview that as a teacher and kind of see what some of the questions are if I wanted to assign the adaptive practice, or I could click the customize to kick me into the quiz. The other option, if I close this out and I go back to CK-12 using the back arrows or our nice little logo that jumps you back to the home page, is I could search. So let's say I wanted to do something on the water cycle, and I search for the water, and I could choose the water cycle concept, or I could filter for practice. So adaptive practice options right here are 26. Looks like there's a bunch of options on there. So here's some water cycle practice. Or I could add those concepts back in, and I could just jump straight to that page. So if I go to a concept page for a particular topic, which has all different types of learning options, or I go directly into that practice through that search, I get to this page. And this is our practice page. This is super helpful because it has a couple pieces. I could write new questions right off the bat from here. So create new question option. I could, and that would kind of put questions into future quizzes. I could customize this right here, and I even have the options to kind of download this as a worksheet or pull an embed code for the practice. But in general, we're going to talk about kind of taking this and customizing it to quiz. So I'm going to click on the customize button. And this is, as I said, this is kind of the advanced practice session. So we are going to plow through a bunch of pieces here. You can always go back and watch the recording of this if you need to kind of fill in. I definitely recommend that reference sheet. But we are going to try to work our way through these different pieces. So in this case, I have the water cycle or science right here. I could, let's say, call this a demo for July 16th. I could write a description to remind me what's in here. I could change the number of attempts. So we have options from 1 to 10 or unlimited. So let's say you wanted to treat it as a quiz and you wanted to give kids maybe 2 choices for that, or you didn't want them to get kind of the chance to do it a bunch of different times. You could choose the number of attempts that they had to complete this. Or if you're really using it as practice or homework, then you could choose unlimited. You could pick the time spent, minutes, or unlimited. That's for the total time for the quiz. For language, if you were building, we have a project going with some questions in another language, but right now kind of you're working with English because that's the question bank you pulled from. And then as we talked about, you have the option to show hints or not show hints, to show your solution, which means students can see it right after they answer the question. And I could shuffle the questions if I wanted students to get them in a different order, but all the students to have the same questions. I'm going to deselect that because if I select that, then I can't choose my order as I go through. And then finally, kind of down here, I can actually pick the number of questions. So right now the system defaulted to 20. So I could change that and say, I only want, let's say, 5 questions within the water cycle. I want to just do a quick little warm up. I can set that. If I click outside, it will warn me you're about to reset any changes you've made in this question set. So you have those pieces there. But you are letting the system pull a brand new set of 5. So just keep that in mind as you go through. Now I could go in and I could pick the actual questions. So here it loaded the question set for me. You can see that it picked 5 questions. It picked a variety of easy, medium, and hard, multiple choice and true, false questions. I can preview those questions by just kind of opening that question up and looking at it here. I could even see what those hints are. And I could choose to say, okay, I like that question, but maybe I don't like this question, and I'm going to pick a different one down here. So you can pick and choose your questions. You can even filter by type. So I could pull all of my ones for, fill in the blank, multiple choice, true, false. I could pick the difficulty level. So I could make sure that I was picking some different options as I worked my way through. Or you could filter by author. In this case, they're all CK-12 because I'm working in a CK-12 account. But if I had put questions in here, I could kind of pull all my questions up there as I worked my way through. Now, I could also reorder these questions. So if I, let's say, chose this one, but I wanted this one to go ahead, I could reorder it. If you're not being given the option to reorder, it's probably because you chose the shuffle questions option, in which case the system is going to put them in a random order, so it's not going to let you kind of pick those pieces. And then the last piece I can do besides kind of picking questions within the bank is I could add my own question. So here I could click this add my own question. It bumps me into the question editor. I'm actually going to go back because we're going to go into that a little more in the next section here. But we do have the option to create your own questions as you go through. And then the last part that I might do, once I kind of save, you can see the 6 questions that I chose from here. I'm going to save that. And note that I can have up to 100 questions in here. So I could add not only questions from the water cycle, but I could add another concept. So let's say I click here and I search for a concept on water. I could expand those other options. There's some biology. There's a water cycle for earth science. Let's add states of water from earth science. So that would add another concept kind of on a similar topic. I could do this for a unit review and put a bunch of different pieces. And once again, I could choose to reset the number, or I could choose to kind of go in and actually answer the specific questions. Now, if I wanted the states of water to show up first before the water cycle questions, I would just hover over the number and drag that box to reorder them. So states of water shows up first, and then the water cycle. Now, if I update this, it will save kind of all of those changes. And I can preview this and look at what it looks like. So in this case, I have, okay, here's the 16 questions I picked, 10 from the states of water and 6 from the water cycle. And I can actually go through and preview that. And then when I'm done, once I'm all set and I've saved this, if I had any other updates, I could go, but then I can go back. And right now, because I came from the practice, it bumped me back to the practice. But if I want to find this, I could find any quiz I made within my library. So you'll see here's my demo for July 16th. I'm good to go. I can access that. Once I go into that particular section, instead of seeing the option to customize, because I own this quiz, I now see edit. But I can still create new questions right off the bat. I can still kind of pull pieces, and we'll talk about embedding as you go through. If you remember that customize page, or that like modality page, so let's say we have the water cycle. I'm going to pull that page up for a second. So that concept right there, the water cycle here. We keep our content pretty cleanly separate from yours. So if I go to, this is all the CK-12 content, but if I go under community content and I look at assessments, you'll see I did a demo a week ago for this and my demo for here. Only I can see those pieces. I didn't publish that quiz. You know, that content could be used by others. I could share that. My kids could share that, kind of expanding from there. But it's something that you could find there as well if you were kind of browsing through content. But in general, anything that you customize or create, I really recommend that you access from your library because that's the cleanest and easiest option from there. So I think with that, we're going to pause for some questions and see what we can answer.
Sure. I think one of the biggest kind of waves of questions that came in are people still trying to wrap their head around adaptive practice versus quizzes. So from your questions, let me just knock off a few of these here. Once you press customize on adaptive practice, it is no longer adaptive. So it becomes what we're calling a quiz, which you may use as homework or review or anything. It might not be a quiz to you, but that's what we call it on our system, a quiz. And at that point, you're able to use that same question bank and choose the questions that you would like to serve up to your students as a quiz. And you can select the time limit and all that kind of thing. But one of the questions at the top is, you know, can you choose which type of questions are given from adaptive practice? Can you eliminate specific questions? If you want to make changes to adaptive practice, the only way to do that right now on our system is to create a quiz where it loses all adaptivity. Katie's checking out some of these other questions that our team has flagged here. Thanks to Carl and Star who are answering a lot by text. But Katie, I'll kick it over to you for a few of these.
So one of these questions is, are questions added to the quiz now in your permanent question bank? They're not automatically published in our question bank. Every so often we will kind of pull some cool ones into there. So they fit under the same kind of Creative Commons license that our whole site is under, but they are not automatically added. So it's not that if you put them in there, then the next person can access them immediately. But they are potentially available down the road within that piece. You do need to work under our license. You cannot put copyrighted questions into our database. That is not something that fits under a license for any part of our system, whether it's the practice or the Flexbooks. And then another one right after this is when I allow a random number of questions for a quiz without editing, does each student receive the exact same questions? When you customize, you are picking a set of, like a subset of our practice, and every student will see the same ones. If you have the system pull a random set of 5, every student will see those same 5. If you pick and choose those, 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever you want in there, or 1 or 2 even as like a quick thing, every student will see the same exact question. It does not change, and so that's one of those things where it's no longer adaptive if you choose to move into the quiz part. And it looks like maybe we have a couple more that we can answer here, and then maybe we'll move on from there. Can these be assigned to individual students if you only want students certain to be able to redo a quiz? If you want to assign to individual students anything to individual students, in general, you need to create kind of different groups. If you simply want a couple students to be able to redo a quiz, you can dismiss an attempt, and then only those students would have the ability to kind of do a second attempt. So on that attempt option, if I set that, when we go into reports, I can show you what that looks like in terms of dismissing an attempt. So we'll go from there.
Okay, keep the questions coming into Q&A. Again, we're typing answers. We'll stop and we'll answer a bunch of these live. In the chat window, just make sure that you're sending your chat messages to all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see what you are typing. Let me steal the screen back from Katie here. And we're going to move into the next section, which is on creating questions for quizzes.
So earlier I showed you how to create quizzes and referenced how you can add your own questions, but now let's talk about creating those questions. So the first piece is to talk about the question types. So we have a number of question types within our system: multiple choice, select all that apply, true, false, short answer, fill in the blank, drag and drop, which is really a category option, highlighting, and discussion. And so all of these different types are available for you based on when that type became available in our system. You'll see more of one type versus kind of some of the newer higher level thinking or categorizing or organizing pieces in our system, but they are all available to you to create your own questions. So how to do that? So the first thing you do when you get kicked into the create your own questions or add a question thing is that you need to pick your question type. After you create your question, the only thing that cannot be changed is the question type. So you want to be really thoughtful about kind of what type of question you're working with before you save that. And then afterward, you're going to write your question prompt. Based on the question type, you'll have answer fields or distractors. Let's say if you have multiple choice and you need some wrong answers in there too. So you're going to add those in. If you want to include a hint, you can do that. If you are creating inline questions and you want really specific feedback for students, you can add the feedback to your answers. Select your difficulty level, and then kind of add in any details such as the concept it goes with, other, grade level, whatever other pieces you want. And there is an option on that right side where it says variables. You could start playing around and creating options where each student gets a different kind of math number in there, but those can get a little tricky. So feel free to play with that, but I think we're probably not going to cover that as much within this particular session. While you are creating questions, you have the option to use our math editor. That is available for anything that's within our system. Students can answer using just the simple keys on a keyboard, so keep that in mind as you design your questions, but you can format math text for any of the pieces, whether that's the preset choices in a multiple choice or drag and drop or the actual question prompt. And so you're welcome to use that drop down, or if you know LaTeX coding, go ahead and use that math editor to build your own. Let's talk about a couple of sample options. So here's a multiple choice. I kind of build it with the prompt and then the answer choices that are right and wrong. And what it would look like when I went from there is they get kind of the question, and then they can pick and choose the correct answer and see the hints there. The next one would be a highlighting option. So to do that, I would highlight, you need whole words. So if you're trying to highlight parts of a word, you do need to space that word out. That's just kind of to make it easy, especially for younger kids, because they can't select individual letters. And then once I highlight those, the student would say, okay, well, they got both parts that spell the sound in that word, or they got 1 out of 2 of those correct as they worked their way through, just so that they can kind of see what that looks like. It's almost like a circle, the correct answer option. The next type is a drag and drop. As I said, this was a category. So in this case, it says determine which are equivalent, equal, or not equal. And then you kind of rate your answers. You highlight it as if you were highlighting pieces and drag them into the appropriate categories. And when that comes up, that would look like this, where then students can kind of pick each part and drag it into the correct boxes.
So before Katie demonstrates how to create questions on our site, I'd like to answer a few frequently asked questions. Some of these have already come up by you all in our Q&A today, but where do questions that I create live? Questions that you create live on the back end. You can access and edit your questions through the quiz editor by adding the concept to which they are tagged. Can everyone see the questions I create? Questions you create are not automatically published to the CK-12 question bank. If you share a link to a quiz you created that includes your own questions, then other users would be able to see those questions. Can I share my questions with others? You can share quizzes currently via the matching URL with others. These quizzes would include any original questions. And then how can I create questions for concepts not available on CK-12? You can do this through the quiz editor. Create a new quiz from your library, click Add Question Set, and then create new questions. When selecting a concept, choose Search in My Library, tag your question to a read. This is going to be something that we're going to cover more in depth in our community contributed and non-STEM content webinar. So we encourage you to attend this if you're interested in creating your own Flexbook and questions.
I'm just going to have Lindsay, we did get a question about what a drag and drop question looks like. Just go back one screen for 1 sec so that we can see what that looks like. And that there on the right, that's how you would build it. We'll show you, but the viewpoint right there in terms of what it looks like, they can kind of drag and drop. So just so that you get to see that if we don't get a chance to kind of get into all the different question types. So I'm going to swap over live and we are going to start exploring. So let's say I wanted to create a question, a quiz from scratch. So I'm in my library. We did show you kind of from the Explore menu, from Adaptive Practice, I could click Customize. But if I wanted to create a new one, I would go ahead and I would click Create New, and I would click Create Quiz. And now I can go in here, I can start from this part. I could write, let's say, a new demo for question creation. And I could set all these pieces, or I could go in and I could add a question set. So there's a couple of choices. I could choose to pick a topic to start, and that would pull my questions right off the bat, or I could create my new questions right from here. So as I said, the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to pick your question type. So here we have multiple choice. I have my question prompt and my multiple choice answers. I could switch to select all that apply, or true false options. True false option works really well also for any kind of binary either or choice. And we had some questions in terms of, can I put images in here? You have full control, just like in our editor, to insert an image, to insert text that's formatted, both within there and within answer choice. But a student only has the characters on their keyboard. So just keep that in mind as you're working your way through. So I could, as I said, write kind of my pieces in here. You can see I can add a hint down here. And then I can tag it to a concept. So let's say my first concept is going to still be on water. So I could click here, I could do water cycle, and I would tag it to a CK-12 concept. If I needed to tag it to something else I created, I just click search in my library and tag it to any content that I had created separately. But let's look at kind of creating a question. So we'll start with a short answer. I'm going to change my question type. So once again, it's kind of changing the answer piece. And I'm going to have, when water vapor is converted from a gas to a liquid, which part of the water cycle is this? So in this case, I'm going to put condensation in here. If I had a multiple, let's say I had something like, I'm just going to show you for a second, 2x plus 3 as an answer for math. That would be the same as 2 space x space plus space 3 space. So this ignore spaces is something that you want to keep in mind kind of if you're working with something that the spacing doesn't matter. But in this case, it's a single word, so either option is fine. If you find that your students commonly misspell a word like this, you could put an alternate answer in with a similar spelling. That's also super helpful if you're trying to put something like 1/2 and 0.5, because either the fraction or the decimal might be valid for an answer. So just keep in mind that this add alternate correct answer is super useful if you need to do that at any point in time. So if I add this, I said we could add this hint in. This occurs after the water has already been evaporated. And I can add this. So now I can submit this. I can preview what this looks like. So you can see kind of what this looks like here. I have condensation. I get my hint. I can check it. We're good to go.
Let me just interrupt you real quick. A couple people just asked if capitalization matters for correct answers. And then we had several people asking about, can you embed an image, a video? What can you embed into questions?
Sure. So right now, condensation with lowercase c or uppercase c wouldn't matter. So that is kind of the current option. If that's something where we end up getting a lot of teachers trying to write English questions and we need that capitalization to matter, then we can look into options for that. But right now, spacing matters if you choose to like unclick this, where we're now noting that I care about the spacing in my answer. Otherwise, you can choose to turn that off, but capitalization doesn't matter. So in this box where the answer is, notice that I just can type normal text. That's all I can type in here. In the actual prompt, I have full options to kind of insert an image, to embed a video, to do anything I want in the question prompt. But because this is something a student would have to type, I can only use the keys on my keyboard. So that's the difference between what I can put in versus what a student could put in as you went through. In this case, it looks like we still have this question on images. So right here, if I click this image piece, it would prop up our image menu, and then I would choose my file. I would add in kind of any pieces there. I'd add in my attributions, my source and credit. This is being swapped to our newer version in the general editor so that it'll match shortly. But in the meantime, make sure you're citing those pieces as you go through. So with that one, I think we're done with this piece. I'm going to add another question to this bank. And let's say I want a fill in the blank one. So I could do something where I did fill in the blank here. And I want, let's say, a third degree polynomial with roots 2, -1, and 3. Now what I would do for fill in the blank is I would write out my answers. And I would put in all the pieces that I wanted here. I can add this part in. I can make these superscripts. I can say, okay, well, what do I want in front of this? I want a 1. I want a plus sign. And then I can make all of these pieces the part that the student fills in. So I want them to basically fill in, oops, let's delete that option. Let's pick the full number. Here, they're going to choose all of the coefficients and the individual component. And then this is what they would have to fill in. So because I'm still working in that water cycle concept, it's going to keep tagging it to there. I could add a new concept if I wanted to do so, but in this point, because I'm working in here, all my stuff will be tagged. I can submit that, and if I preview this question, you can see that they have to kind of fill in all the pieces. So this is a great way if you don't want them to have to worry about all of the formatting and parts, that they can work their way through. Okay, so let's do another set. We'll do maybe 1 or 2 more question types, just so you can see what these look like. So if let's say I wanted to do highlighting, from here I could say highlight the nouns, and I could write an astronaut weighs less on the moon than he would on Earth. And I could go through and I could start highlighting all of the nouns within the sentence. And even the pronouns. Okay, it says highlighting wouldn't be allowed because I went partly into another word. That's why that was having issues. Highlight nouns and pronouns, we got them all here. So And what we have here is this kind of use font option. We could go through and I could turn that off. This, because it's a highlighting was designed at the lower level, it was using that larger font option. If I went through and removed all these for a second, I should be able to deselect that choice, and then I could go back in and kind of add those pieces in there. And so then the student would just kind of pick and choose what they wanted from that particular piece. I'm gonna do one more right here in terms of that drag and drop, just so you can see what it looks like. I'm gonna change the question type. It resets all of my pieces. And let's say I wanted to sort into nouns or verbs. Okay, I could say, well, we have an astronaut is a noun, weighs is my verb, we got some more nouns, and I would start picking my categories, and I'd say, okay, category 1 is nouns, and the astronaut goes in there, and the moon goes in there, and my category 2 is my verbs, and in this case, my weighs would go in there. So I could create that as I worked my way through. I could add my hint if I wanted to, and I could submit that. And let's say I'm done with these pieces. So anytime I create my own questions, so it pulled some questions from the water cycle, it pulled all those pieces in here, I can edit this, I can see my questions, and my new questions that I created would show up kind of at the bottom here. So if I had just created a new question set, anything that I worked on would show up down there. I think because I hadn't chosen them and I was just building questions, they might even be right here. So you can see kind of this sort into nouns or verbs. So you'll either find them kind of based on how you're doing it at the very bottom of your thing or right under any pre-selected questions. So this is the one where I was talking about we're sorting accordingly. And I can check that. And so I got 2 out of 3 because I missed the last one. So I could choose this one. I could choose my 3rd degree polynomial. I could save all that work. And then it would pull any other questions from that particular topic that it had pre-selected and pull them in there. And now added 2 more to here. And that's kind of what you're doing from building your own questions as you worked your way through. So maybe we'll stop. It looks like we're getting a bunch of questions in here. Maybe we'll stop and answer some questions as we go through.
Well, I think you alluded to it earlier, the idea of variables, but that was a hot topic, as well as, are you able to show a range of numbers and answers? I don't know if that's anything we've got time to demo today, or...
Sure. So let me just kind of do a new one for a second. I'll click Create Questions. If you're looking for kind of a range of answers, I don't think we have. We're looking for specific answers. So like in a short answer question, you'd be looking for correct answers that fit kind of within that particular option. So that alternate correct answer might be a choice if you wanted to do like 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 as your answer choices. I'm just going to quickly preview variables, and then I honestly say kind of play around with it, see how it goes. So if you open this, you can add a variable, and I could say, for example, I'm going to name this variable X. I'm going to choose it from a set. So in this case, I could choose that answer from a list. So let's say my answer choices are 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And I could say things like not equal to if I wanted to put an expression in there that didn't, like in my answer choice options. So now I have this variable to work with. So I could say I'm going to drag this, X plus 3 equals what? And then my correct answer would be simply X plus 3. And well, I'd have to create this new variable. So let's add this new variable. We get X plus 3. And so we kind of say my Y answer is a constant variable, X plus 3. So whatever that answer is. And then we kind of drag that in. So that's a correct answer. Some other options might be like, 4 plus 3 is 7, or 5 plus 3 is 8, and I could continue on and say some answer choices. So you'd have to kind of think through that, but I recommend kind of playing around, seeing how it works, going from there.
Okay, a couple of rapid fire questions. We've got, while we're kind of talking about math notation stuff, are all math notations available in the math editor, like matrices, vectors, and so on?
So when you're building and you want to use our math editor, you can use any of our drop-down options in here. We do have options for matrices and vectors. You can see matrices right here. You can see kind of vectors. I would have to kind of find, I think they're under here. You could kind of build your own pieces. But you can also build anything that's not already in there. You can build in LaTeX coding, so you could look up the code if you really wanted to. So go ahead and play around with that.
Somebody asked, can you please go over checking the short answer questions or discussions? I notice it is a choice too. So maybe just how does our system score the questions is my guess.
Sure. So the pieces here in terms of checking kind of your short answer, right now our system scores things based on correct or incorrect. So all of your answer choices here are set. So like if I pick like select all that apply, it's going to reset this question type, which is fine. I can set, let's say, this question and this answer. So this is answer 1 and this would be answer 2. They would have to get both of those correct to get credit for that question. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're building stuff, that right now our system scores all or none for those questions. There's not kind of an in-between point where we are kind of testing some things out ourselves. Maybe you might see one, but in general, it's all or nothing.
Okay, before we move on to the next section, keep your questions coming. We're going to continue to answer them, but we want to show you a short video clip of an educator who we met in El Paso School District in Texas, and he talks about how he uses practice and quizzes in the classroom.
So the practice, and especially now with some of the updates, has become more adaptive to where the students are working on different questions. The more questions they get right, they seem to get more challenging. You know, I've noticed as I go around help kids, question number 5 for one student is not question number 5 for another student. And as a teacher, it benefits me because it challenges the students to their level. I think I had a student earlier talk about how it's kind of adjusted to her and it kind of keeps her engaged. And then also, too, it helps me kind of see where these students are at. And then the quizzes I attach to the practices that come from that question bank, those tend to use the same questions for every student. But then again, at the same time, the real-time feedback is something I like, too. So the kids, they take the test, they know immediately what their grade is. They don't have to wait for me to grade a paper, grade an assignment, and then on top of that, they can go back and review and see, okay, I'm missing these types of questions, or I'm doing well in the medium type of questions, but I'm missing the hard questions. And so if they choose to, they can even go back to the practice and kind of work their way back to some of those harder questions.
All right, let's move on to our next section on how to use quizzes and see student work through reports.
So inline questions is kind of one option to use. It's a new feature within our CK-12 lessons. So here you can see an example within the text. You can see kind of an interactive above and the beginning of text below. And when you kind of expand that a bit and we start looking at what that looks like, it looks almost like a regular set of practice or quiz questions. So the idea behind this is that really when they're embedded within there, you want to design these to help students learn. So we do recommend that you add specific feedback for wrong answers for any questions you create. And because this is an option for learning, students are given multiple attempts. So this question, they would go through until they got it correct. And hopefully they'd see that any feedback that you wrote within there. And then you currently don't get reports. This is just kind of adding questions into a lesson to help students learn. If you wanted a report for this quiz, you would need to assign that quiz separately, and then all the standard formats for quizzes in terms of attempt numbers, incorrect, correct pieces would kind of play out from there. But with inline questions, you wouldn't see a report at this time. Now, in order to do that, open that quiz in your library, and under that 3 ellipses, you'll see that embed as inline question piece. If I click on that, it will pop up an embed code, and I can copy that embed code and then paste it into my editor. So within kind of the workflow of a lesson, that little play button is that multimedia option. This is super helpful if you want to pull a Plix into your system and you want to write your own questions to go with it. You could write your own custom questions and embed them directly under an included Plix. So other than inline questions, the other option for using quizzes within our new 2.0 platform is to swap out any included practice for a custom quiz. You can do that using kind of the prompt within the beginning piece. If I own a book and I haven't customized that particular lesson, it may pop up that window that says save this section to your library, and it will kind of create a copy of that section for you. And then you can go back in and pick your quiz. You can create a new quiz, or you can pick a quiz that you've already created. and then you can add that in. So 2 options to use them within 2.0 lessons. You could embed them as inline questions, you could attach them as quizzes, or you could just assign those quizzes separately outside of 2.0.
If you were in our Getting Started with Adaptive Practice and Assignments webinar, we talk about how to quick assign 2.0 lessons, practice, and other modalities to your CK-12 or Google Class. You can do the same thing for FlexBooks 2.0, the lessons that now have a quiz instead of practice attached to them. Our original reads, whether standalone or in a 1.0 FlexBook, are assigned separately from any practice or quiz modality. So we've unified it with 2.0. That's what you're assigning. You're actually assigning the practice or the quiz with it. Our reads and quizzes are still separate in our old 1.0 original books. If you are using Canvas or Schoology, you can also assign any quizzes you've created along with other modalities such as interactives and reads to your class in those systems. The ability to assign FlexBook 2.0 lessons with attached practice or quizzes will be coming this summer to both Canvas and Schoology. Then there is one other option from within CK-12 classes. This allows you to create an assignment for practice, quizzes, or a combination of those, but it does not include FlexBook 2.0 lessons or other modalities, so we generally recommend that you assign from each modality or lesson page.
So a lot of you guys have been asking about scoring for individual questions, but I want to take a second and talk about kind of scoring in general and reports for CK-12 classes. This heat map, which will very shortly be available in Google Classroom, Canvas, and Schoology as well. So feel free to kind of keep that in mind, even though you can't see it today. You will see it this summer. And you can see the check marks on the left for general learning modalities for an interactive or a read. And those would be a check mark in CK-12 or a 0 or full credit within a learning management system. But let's look at the assignments for practice and quizzes. So this particular example was created from within a CK-12 class. That's the kind of the one option to group combinations of practice and quizzes under the same assignment heading. All quick assign modalities would just have their own heading kind of at the top. So regardless of the bigger title, you can see that the different modalities are split within reports. So each part is based on the type of assessment. That first one, that practice, is out of 10 right for practice. So this first student turned in their work with 10 or more right on the first practice. And then the next person there, the next assignment they did, they actually submitted it when they'd only done 2 right on the second one. So that's not kind of a correct versus incorrect. They just hadn't progressed far enough to get 10 correct. And then the last one, that last quiz, is based on that percent correct out of the total number of questions in the quiz. If I clicked on any of those individual percentages, it will pop up more details. So I'll show you that in a minute. But that gives you kind of the difference between those scoring. Now for quizzes attached to FlexBooks 2.0 lessons, we do give you a few key pieces of information under insights within that lesson. And I will expand on this as we kind of build out those insights. So right now you can see the time the student spent on any particular lesson, as well as the percent correct for the quiz, and even the ratio of correct to total questions on the quiz. And then more can be found within an individual report. So I'm going to jump over. I'm going to pull up our page. We are going to go, there is a add new option kind of right here. Let's go back out of here for a second, just so that we're back into the system. So I'm going to pull up classes so you can see what this looks like. So if I go into classes and we pull a sample class out of here, I'm going to start and kind of work my way backwards. So let's look at assignments for a second. And I could pull this particular assignment, my FlexBook 2.0 lesson and quiz. I can pull it up. And you'll see that there are a number of options in terms of kind of right now there's a quiz attached. There was a question, can I have both a quiz and a practice in one lesson? Right now in 2.0, you either have the practice attached or you have the quiz attached. You can't attach both of them at this point in time. Even in the related modalities, that will swap out that practice. But you could kind of put a link in to that quiz, or you just assign that quiz separately. You just can't assign it together in one lesson for this particular piece. But if I expand my grid up here into my toolbar, I can click on Insights. And these are those new insights I was just talking about. Now, my newest classes don't have anything, but my summer 2019 class has done a bunch of work already. So if I click on Brace, you can see that they only spent 19 seconds on this lesson, and that maybe that's why they didn't get a full 100% on this particular piece. Maybe we'd covered in class, but you want to kind of look at what you have there. So I could go through and pick and choose, and I'd see the time on lesson and that quiz piece. Now, if I wanted kind of more detailed reports, I'd go into actually the reports section of my class. So that was super quick. So if I go back to my class and I click on this reports option in the left navigation, it bumps me into my reports, it bumps me into that heat map, and I can click on any particular topic here. So right here, I get kind of the correct, streak, skip, time spent, correct and incorrect answers for my students. I can go through and I could see different pieces as I worked my way through here. So let's say I looked at this. We have Tuscany kind of has this particular piece in terms of her practice. It gives me my easy, medium, and hard pieces there. I get my quizzes here. And if I clicked into it, I could also see a little bit more right now. So this will tell you the attempt piece. So right now you can see that there's one attempt, and I can view these details for that attempt. If she had a second one, I would have the option to dismiss that as well. So if I go back for a second and I pick kind of another quiz option here, you'll see that we have different students that might or might not have done one or more. So if you're looking for a little bit more piece within that particular thing, you can click over into that lesson and into that full detailed report. We are pulling those attempts. We are pulling the skill meter for practice kind of into this heat map, but they are coming shortly. So I do want to talk about swapping out practice because I did cover that a bit. So if I go into my physical properties and matter section, so let's say I go back into this book as a whole. I own this book. You can see it says by Jumpstart Demo. I'm the one that's working on it. But let's say I went into section 3 or 4 and I wanted to go within here and swap out that practice for a quiz. So right now you'll see on the bottom right, it says view practice. If I click on this, I can preview that practice. I could choose a different practice by picking a new concept for this particular topic if I'd done a lot of work changing it, or I could switch this to a quiz. And it says, let's go to the latest revision to that book. It's a good call because that assignment was from an older revision, but I'm gonna switch this to a quiz. I haven't worked on this section so far, so it's gonna make a copy of that section and save it. That now means that I'm editing that piece. It's kind of it's no longer doing a shortcut to our stuff. And then once I own that copy, I can swap this to a quiz. And you'll see we have the demo for question creation I was just working on. I could choose that. I could pick any other quiz I made, or I could create a new quiz, and that would swap that out. What that would mean is that we had that new quiz in place of that particular piece. So let's go ahead and add that in there. The other way to swap out a quiz or practice for a quiz is if I go into the book as a whole. So I can do that through these little breadcrumbs or through this navigation bar. And if I choose to edit this, it will bump me into our editor. And then I could go through and I could choose to pull this up, and let's edit that particular section. And under related modalities within any particular section of a 2.0 lesson, I also have the option to swap out my practice. So under related right here, you'll see my demo for quiz question that's put right in here. Let's say I wanted a different one. I can add any videos, interactives, real-world applications from CK-12 content, stuff I have made from my library that's tagged to the same concept, or my quizzes. So it says you've already chosen quiz demo for quiz creation, but I could select a different one. Let's say I swap that out to a chapter 1 quiz. So now it's gonna swap that chapter 1 quiz. I'm gonna save that content, finalize it so my students can see it and I can assign it. And then that is the new quiz that would be there. So if I view this quiz now, it's that chapter 1 quiz instead of the one that I put there. So 2 options to swap out practice, either directly from the page or within those related modality option. And then the last piece, as we talked about, was kind of pulling for inline questions. And so if I go back to CK-12 and I go to my library, I have 2 options for a quiz that I made if I click on it. So option 1 is I could assign that quiz directly. So if I wanted both practice and a quiz assigned to my students, this would be a way to do that. So I could assign this to my class directly to CK-12 or Google Classroom, or I could do that within an LMS, or I could pull my embed code as inline questions. And today, this afternoon, we're going to be covering advanced flexbook editing, and all of this kind of can go in that little play button within a section. And let me just pull up really quickly one of our new 2.0 Flexbooks so you can see what that looks like within a section. And then we'll probably stop and take some questions from there. So if I go from this part and I open a section, this is the book that currently has inline questions embedded. We're working to add them to other ones. But right here, you'll see these questions directly within the text itself. So that includes it as an inline option with all those different choices.
All right, Katie, as we approach the hour mark, I'm going to do a little bit of wrap-up information, but we do have some questions in our queue. Actually, some that we flagged have to do with the question editor and some specifics about that. So I'll let you review the Q&A, and folks continue to populate that Q&A as well while I steal the screen back and do a little bit of information here. So hang on. Okay, so reminders. We went through a lot of information today. I think this is one of the sessions that's kind of crammed with the most information. And I do want to tell you, not everybody is going to create a quiz on our site. Not everybody's going to customize practice and do some of these more advanced skills. If you're just beginning with CK-12 and you're feeling overwhelmed by the amount of our system's capabilities, like it can do a lot. Just start small. You know, if you're working on Flexbook, start customizing a Flexbook and get into that process a little bit. When you start the school year, maybe just assign some adaptive practice and see how your students respond to it. Then start adding on layers, then create quizzes, then embed a quiz in your book. Just don't feel like you have to do everything all at once. And this recording will be available for you to reference, because I know that there was a lot of information. You might want to review it or review this handout at this tiny URL or in your CEP book. If you missed it, we did have a Getting Started with CK-12 Adaptive Practice and Assignments session that you would want to review in our YouTube queue. We have 2 LMS breakouts coming up this week. Actually, Google Classroom is what we have next on our agenda today. So if you're an avid Google Classroom user and you want to see how CK-12 integrates, I encourage you to join that session. We have one tomorrow with Canvas and Schoology. I think it's tomorrow, maybe it's Thursday. For Canvas and Schoology LMS breakout, or we do post the recordings. But check those out if you're using those learning management systems. If you enjoyed this session, you can sign up for one or more of our case studies. We've got a couple left. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about CK-12 specifically for the use case of homeschoolers. So if you are curious about this, if you have experience with this, join us tomorrow for a case study to hear about, you know, how educators are using it specifically for homeschooling. And then we also have CK-12 for independent schools on Thursday. That's going to have a panel of folks who have been using CK-12 in that context. So while these don't count toward the live session requirement, you can still register for these, or you can always watch the recordings on our YouTube playlist. The session assignment, don't forget to turn an assignment for the session. If you are trying to become certified, you can find everything you need in the CEP book. This includes the text of the questions so you can review them and prepare before you click Start Quiz to complete the assignment in one sitting. We also have a feedback form that is linked to your book. You will see that button that says Give Feedback on every single page. We read all of your feedback. It helps us to improve. So let us know what's going well and what we could be doing better after any session when you feel inspired. Finally, as you think about making customizing practice and including practice, quizzes, and Flexbook lessons as part of your curriculum, we invite you to partner with us to help us see how you are using CK-12 and how it's supporting learning and student growth. So if you're interested in kind of doing more of an official partnership or piloting with us, send an email to jumpstart@ck12.org. Of course, you don't need our permission to use our resources. Everything's free and available to you. But if you're really starting a movement within your school or district and you want to talk to our team about that before you go full force, be sure to email us at Jumpstart. So like I said, those of you who need to jump off the webinar, you are free to do so right now, but we are going to stay on because there are some things in our Q&A that Katie's going to demo here in just a minute. Also, if you are a social networker, hashtag CK12 certified is what we are liking these days on Twitter. You can also follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. So I'm going to toss it to Katie and let's see what's left in Q&A.
We had a question about kind of the LMS breakout sessions. If you haven't signed up for them, we offer both of those this week. So today's one is at 1 o'clock. It's for Google Classroom. Thursday, one is on Canvas and Schoology, also at 1 o'clock Pacific time. You can register for either or both of those on our registration page. You'll start seeing kind of red all over the place as we finish sessions, and they're no longer available this summer, but you can always watch on YouTube for those recordings. So that's just kind of a piece for there. We had some questions, a bunch of questions in terms of the editor and how you access it and where you go. So I'm going to open this quiz again. We're going to play around with questions for another minute or two. So this is the quiz that I created. I can edit this quiz. If I was looking at practice, this button would say customize, and that's another way to start it. So if I go from here, I can go in and I could add a brand new question set and then create new questions. So that's one way to bump into the editor. Or I could click into here if I edit this section. And then I could add a question. And either one of those would get me into the editor from there. But if I go down to one of the questions I made, so anyone that I made specifically, I'll see like a little pencil edit icon next to. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this question by clicking on this edit option. And that's going to bump me into the question that I already created for this topic that fits within here. And so there was a question about duplicating. So if you make a question, you can copy that question right here using this copy option at the top. Are you sure you want to copy this question? And that means that if you do like a ton of math formatting and a bunch of stuff and you want all the pieces from there, you could add those parts in and then just kind of tweak the little pieces you want. Right now, you can't copy CK-12 questions. You can create your own and then copy your own. So just keep that in mind. But they're not... it is an option to duplicate your own questions. So now we have two questions in here about short answers. And actually the difference is that you're not really answering short answer questions in the CEP. So this particular piece is actually a short answer question. I can type in content. Students cannot add in subscripts or superscripts. If they need a superscript, they'd have to do like x to the power of 2. It's just the keys on a keyboard for short answer questions. And they are graded based on whether it's correct or incorrect. The only answer choices for short answers are the answer you put here or any alternate answers you add in for here. So just kind of keep that in mind as you work your way through. Now, the answers within the CEP, that question type is a question type we are beta testing. It is not listed in the type of questions because we haven't released that to everyone at this point in time. And in that one, we've been putting words or phrases that are required without the full piece being done. So for short answer, you get all or nothing based on the actual answer choices you have here. For the summer's program, the question type that we're testing out is actually an open response question type. And that gets really tricky because we're trying to figure out kind of what words or phrases would be needed to get credit for that question. And that's how we're grading those questions versus the short answer. So hopefully that clarified kind of how to get there and how to duplicate it and the difference as you work your way through.
All right, it looks like our Q&A is empty, so that must mean that it's time for us to sign off and get ready for the next webinar. Oh, a couple people jumped on here real quick. Let's see. How will students insert equations? And if we assign quizzes or practice in Google Classroom, it will show up there and not in CK-12, right?
So I'm going to answer the Google Classroom piece. If you assign to Google Classroom or you assign within Canvas and Schoology, all of the students will access that content there. You'll see all the reports there. You do not need to do it kind of at the right, like within CK-12. You won't be doing it. In terms of how will students insert equations, students cannot insert equations. There's no equation editor. They could type 2x plus 3 equals 5. So they can type it in with regular text. But if there's special formatting integrals for calculus, then at this point in time, you would need to probably create that as a multiple choice question or something like that. I'm going to go back for a second. Just so you can see if I wanted to create a new question and your options. So once again, if I create those options within here and I add a new question, my choice as I build that question is our full math editor. It's our full option to write in here. If I click in here, you can see, pick our choice. There we go. All of these choices, I can use our math editor. I can insert images. I can insert multimedia. for a multiple choice answer, I could make all those choices as formatted as I wanted. The minute I switch to something where they have to fill it in themselves, then I lose all of those controls because they have pieces. And it says, can they copy and paste an answer with formatting? No. So the only question type that currently allows for copy and paste is that open response question type that you guys are playing around with right now. So that extra formatting would probably not be read cleanly in our system anyway, but we don't allow students to copy and paste short answers. We kind of max out at about 3 words for short answers. And if you want to input a picture for the solution there, so once again, anything they need to put in just has to be that keyword. Anything that you want to put in for multiple choice or something else, you have that full editor, that full formatted text, that full image. You could make a graph and something else and input it within here as you work your way through. So that's kind of the pieces in terms of inputting parts. There are 2 parts here. It says variables and it says type % complete. So that piece is this is like what you need to do to build your question. So if I'm starting to put in, so what is the question? It's going to keep expanding as you fill in parts. So you have to fill in the question, you have to fill in the answer choices, you have to fill in the concept. Those are non-negotiables. If I have incorrect answers, so I could add distractors, I could add feedback to here, kind of as I work my way through for different, this says feedback off. If I turn feedback on, that's where you could add in that feedback. So as I fill in the pieces, that % complete tells you how close you are to being able to save and submit that thing. It looks like the 3 words for short answer is a question. So because it is specific to the questions, like what students type in, you do need to include I think it maxes out at no words. So these are 4 words. If I tried to turn in the short answer right now, it would say, sorry, you have more than 3 words. And the reason for that is that once you get to multiple words, there are too many variables and you're not going to be able to kind of put that part in there, and students are going to more often than not get it wrong because they didn't have the right set of words within there. And then the last question we have in here is, are there plans to include the full math editor, the quiz answers for students? There's currently not a plan to do that. You do need to design your questions where they can answer with a keyboard. If we look into options for that down the road, we will release that at that particular point in time, but it's not currently a component within our system that is being released anytime soon. So, and we're going to keep going through these. So we have the part of the water cycle is condensation will not be accepted. If only the answer that you put in there will be accepted. So keep that in mind as you design your questions for short answer. We are, as I said, testing out a question type where they have a little more flexibility in what they add in from there. So I think with that, if you weren't able to watch anything or you have any questions about your attendance, please just email us at Jumpstart. We will be able to follow up with you on specific components for your requirements, and we will go from there as we work our way through. So thank you, and we hope to see you later on.